Joe Biden has become the first U.S. president to visit Angola. It's also his first state visit to Africa during his administration. The trip is aimed at strengthening ties between the two countries and promoting U.S. investments. And at the heart of Biden's visit is the Lobito Corridor, a new international railway connecting the city of Lobito on Angola's Atlantic coast to Zambia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The aim is to ease the export of minerals. And this $5 billion investment is the largest U.S.-funded infrastructure project in Africa, and some see it as Washington's attempt to counter Chinese influence on the continent. From Washington, D.C., we're joined now by journalist and commentator Redi Tlhabi. Thank you for joining us, Redi. Why, in your opinion, do you think this Lobito project is so important to the U.S.?
Thank you so much for having me. Well, this is a very important visit for Biden. I mean, he's in the twilight of his presidency, and yet he ventured out to a country in southern Africa. It is strategically important to the United States for two reasons. The United States relies on Africa for some minerals that it needs to power electric vehicles. It needs Africa's mineral resources, notably cobalt, nickel, oil, and Angola is rich in both. So while Biden is in Angola, he is going to announce a very ambitious and multi-billion Lobito Corridor development project. What is this one? It is a crucial rail project that links mineral-rich Zambia, Congo, and Angola to the Atlantic. That means that the United States can move these assets with ease towards its shores so that it can power its economy. That's on the economic front. On the geopolitical front, this visit is so important because the United States has been fast asleep when it comes to Africa. It has not been purposeful and intentional in investing in Africa. What was the result of that? China took advantage of the vacuum that was created by the United States, and China has made some significant diplomatic and economic strides on the African continent, extending loans to countries like Kenya, like Zambia, and others. These countries are, of course, indebted, but it allowed China to have influence on the African continent, which is something that causes a lot of anxiety to the United States.
All right, we'll touch on China in just a second, a bit more, but for Angola, I'm guessing, what do you think they would be wanting from this relationship, from this project, from the US at the moment?
It was actually quite surprising that there was a bid for this railway project, and China did also bid, but Angola went with the United States. I think it recognizes that the United States is still the most powerful nation in the world militarily and in other ways. And a lot of countries still remain vulnerable to civil strife internally. And so the United States often comes in with military support, humanitarian aid, and so on. But I also think there's another factor that is important, and that is there are historic relationships between countries that were supported by the Soviet Union, which is, of course, now Russia and others, and the United States during the Cold War. What is important here is that the Soviet Union backed the current government of Angola. So you would have thought that they would turn against the United States and go with China and so on. But there is a certain sentiment that is sweeping through some African countries, and that is the non-aligned kind of stance that says we're no longer in the Cold War period. And I believe that Joe Biden's spokesperson said that to journalists who were traveling with him, that we're not in the Cold War. Africa doesn't have to choose between Russia, China, and the United States. We are looking for economic ties, and it reminds me of something that William Ruto, the president of Kenya, said to me in a recent visit to the US during his state visit. I asked him whether they are pivoting away from China and towards the United States, and I think it is relevant for Angola as well. And his answer to me was, we are not looking east, we are not looking west, we are looking forward. So I think for Angola, they do want to cement those good relationships with the United States.
On the issue of China, isn't the US a bit late in the game, considering the gains China has made over the past couple of decades?
The US is late in the game, but here's the thing. It is not in Africa's interest to just look to one partner. It is not good for our economies. We need to diversify. We need to have a plurality of options. We need to fill our basket with a whole lot of options, just as China is doing. So I don't think that, the Angola should be worried about who's coming in. It should be about economic returns and strengthening those economic ties. And talking about the United States being late, of course it is late, but it is also worried about the rise of China, and it wants to kind of truncate or frustrate China's advances on the African continent.
On that note, I'll take you back a few years. When Donald Trump came to power, he looked at Africa through the lens of China and Russia. When Joe Biden became president, he didn't necessarily depart from that. In fact, this is at the end of his presidency when he is making that first journey to a sub-Saharan African country. Where does this place Africa in terms of priority when it comes to the US?
That's such a brilliant question because it speaks to a multiplicity of things. The first is that my understanding of US foreign policy is that it often doesn't matter who's in the White House. The US has particular pillars to its foreign policy. They see themselves as a country of dominance, as a strong country, as it were, the arbiter of who's democratic and who's not. They use the economic and military might to influence how the world is structured. And so whether it's a Biden presidency, an Obama presidency, or a Trump presidency, it still comes with those kind of values that are intrinsic to US foreign policy since the end of the Cold War. I want to say one final thing on this. Joe Biden saw this trip as a necessary venture. People are saying, but he won, he lost, the Democrats lost the election, and he humiliatingly had to withdraw in July at the very last minute. Why does he bother going on the state visit? Precisely because of what you mentioned when we started this conversation, the crucial Lobito Corridor. And also, I think that Joe Biden's administration would have calculated that this corridor would be important for Trump as well from the point of view of China's dominance. We know this. We know that Donald Trump is obsessed with cutting China down to size. And if he also sees the Lobito Corridor as a way of closing the door to China, then he will run with it and build on it from where Joe Biden took off or left off, I beg your pardon.
All right. We appreciate your thoughts and analysis. Journalist and commentator Redi Tlhabi, many thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.